Hi, Lee. Thank you for joining me today.
Hi, Erica. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I want to get into your story, but let's start with who Lee was before this spiritual journey started. I mean, you talk a lot about finding your calm. Most of us are living in a time with lots of noise in our head, right? So, what was your life like before this journey started?
So, like most Westerners, the journey, it's hard to even say when the journey started. And I have a very early on in the book, I have a chapter about when does the journey begin? And does it begin when I was a child and I went to my father's Sunday school class when I was in kindergarten and, just felt a presence in the room? Does it start later on in life when I take a comparative religions class in college and I read Pierre Masson's seminal book, The Snow Leopard? Does it start when I met my aunt, who I had met when I was younger, but hadn't seen her for quite a long time because we live in different parts of the country, who was a Buddhist nun, very famous woman in some circles. Her name is Joanna Macy. Um, and so where does it begin? But, it begins in fits and starts. And so even though I had these sort of inklings and moments that I might want to start pursuing this path, for the most part, I was a 20-something, 30-something young man working hard as a journalist in New York City. And talk about noise. You're living in New York, and my deadlines, I would be at the office till midnight. Um, and I had young kids, and yeah, it was just a crazy, crazy lifestyle. And like most of us, especially the deadlines and the kids and everything. And so trying to juggle all that. And then, unfortunately, my wife and I started to have some marital difficulties, and we had been very much in love before, but the stresses of modern living just did something to our marriage, and I was getting even more crazed and turning into a person I really didn't want to be. I'd be angry, anxious, just not feeling right. And I decided it was time that I needed something to ground myself, and I started studying Zen in more earnest and sought out Peter Matheson as a teacher, and that led me to a path that was very transformative.
Can you explain a bit for our listeners what the difference of, say, Zen is compared to meditation? I mean, I've heard the term Zen, but never really fully studied what the practice of it is. So for myself as well, can you just give us a background on that?
Sure. So Zen is a kind of Buddhism. Buddhism is a 2,600-year-old religion that started in India. And, many of your readers will know that, but I'm just going to go over the basics because they might not. And it's like the Christian tradition. Over the years, it branched out and splintered into different groups. In Christianity, you've got Catholicism, you've got Presbyterian or Protestantism, and then within those, and Catholicism, you've got the Greek Orthodox, and you've got all sorts of different kinds and whatever. And so, and then the Protestant, you've got the Methodists and the Presbyterians and the this and the that. Same thing in Buddhism, and it went from India, and part of it splintered into different groups. One in Southeast Asia, which is Theravada Buddhism, and another branch which went into China, and then from China went to Japan and Korea. And that's the beginnings of Zen. And Zen is a much more pared back form of Buddhism, as opposed to a lot of people might be aware of Tibetan Buddhism, which is, got like a lot of colors and robes and chanting and incense. And whereas Zen is trying to get back to what the Buddha himself did, which is basically just sit and meditate. And the Buddha did it under a tree and achieved enlightenment, but he didn't have a lot of trappings around him. And so Zen tries to do the same thing. And within Zen, there's a lot of different sects. I practice what's called Soto Zen, which is a kind of Japanese Zen that's kind of considered the gentler form of Zen. There's another Japanese Zen called Rinzai, which is considered a little more strict and militant. But at its core, some people call Zen the religion before religion. So it's not really religion. It's really a spiritual practice. I look at it as a training method. Really, it's a way of training your mind to to sit and to quiet and to start to experience what is out there if you start to get rid of all the noise and get rid of all the anxiety and all the stuff around you and sort of use your sixth sense. there is a lot of misunderstanding about what Zen is. I threatened at one point to start a museum. I was going to collect everything I could find with the word Zen in it. I've seen Zen fertilizer, I've seen Zen wine, I've seen, Zen kitchen appliances, I've seen Zen everything. I was going to like start collecting it all because it has become this sort of buzzword in the West in our culture. And people sort of know what it means. It means a calming down and a kind of a gentleness, but it's also very misunderstood in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to answer that question too, because clearly there's a difference between the word used socially and the actual practice of it. What was going on in your life where you decided to go down that path? Because I, I feel like there's pivotal moments where something happens and you end up down the road that changes your entire life, that trajectory. What was You had your traumatic brain injury. What happened to you to cause that?
So I had actually started studying with Peter about 2 years before my accident. So I had already, and the pivotal moment really was that life crisis of a divorce, and I had young kids, and fighting with your spouse, and just becoming a person I didn't want to be because I also had, really serious work deadlines at the same time, and just a lot of anxiety, a lot of things going on. And that was what really started me down the path in earnest at that point. But I was run over by a car about 2 years into my studies with Peter, and I suffered a traumatic brain injury. I was briefly in a coma just for a couple of days. And when I woke up, I couldn't walk. I had trouble listening and speaking and holding a pen, so I couldn't write. I couldn't think well enough to put two words together into a sentence, which is kind of hard when you're a writer. Um, and I ended up in rehab for a year. And so the first book, these two books cover somewhat the same time frame. They overlap a little bit. But the first book really covered the traumatic brain injury and what happened to me and how I healed from that. And using Zen to heal was part of that. But it was also using sailing and kids and dogs and just other wonderful things. And this new book focuses really on my time with Peter as my teacher and what one can learn from a really great, wise teacher. And I like to describe it as sort of a cross between Tuesdays of Mori and The Snow Leopard, which was Peter's seminal book, which was really a Zen book. So it focuses more on that. And what I learned from my brain injury was that I had a really great medical team. I had a neurologist, a neuropsychologist, a therapist, physical therapist, vestibular therapist, which is getting your balance back because I couldn't walk because I didn't have my sense of balance. I'd injured that part of my brain. Um, and I was really educated about the mind and the brain from a Western perspective, which I hadn't been before. And yet I was also studying with Peter and my other teachers about learning about mind and the brain from an Eastern perspective. And being able to put those two together was really wonderful and fascinating. And I was in rehab for a year. And when I came out of rehab, I went back into my studies even stronger my Zen studies, even stronger than I had been before, because I realized how meditation could heal. And and Zen, specifically Zen meditation, helped me. I remember one of my first conversations with my neurologist was very funny because I thought that he wouldn't like my Zen practice because so much of Zen is about quieting the mind and stopping your thinking. And here I had injured my brain. I was trying to relearn how to think. And I was kind of like, these don't seem compatible. And I sat down with him and I kind of sheepishly said, doctor, I have this crazy thing I do, this Zen meditation. Like, is that okay? And to his credit, he said, "Oh no, that's wonderful. That's really good for you. That will help you heal all the research we have on meditation is really going to be good for your brain, and you should really keep doing it and do it even more." And so that was really fascinating. And as I say, really the fact that Zen really helped me through my rehab and through the post accident and the stress and everything was really eye opening and made me go even deeper. So.
How was it that you came to study with Peter Matheson?
So when I was in college, I was climbing in the mountains in Alaska. I've always been very athletic and an outdoorsman, and I was with some friends, and we were in some pretty remote areas of the Alaskan range doing some climbing. And we stumbled across another guy who was out there by himself, and we'd both been out for weeks in the wilderness, and we'd read all our books that we'd taken with us because you don't carry a lot of books when you're backpacking climbing, but we had a few. And we'd been among the three of us, we've been trading them, and then we meet this other guy, and he said, "Hey, do you have any books?" Like I've finished mine, and we said, "Oh yeah, we finished ours. You want to trade?" And he said, "I have this book that's going to change your life. It's called The Snow Leopard." And The Snow Leopard had just come out. This was the late 70s, and it won the National Book Award for nonfiction, and it was the story of Peter's beginning for search for meaning. He had gone to Nepal after his wife died of cancer, and he had studied with some Japanese masters in New York, and he'd studied with some of these people that he met in Nepal, and that book really spoke to me. It was an amazing book. It was a travel log, here I am in the mountains, and I'm reading this book that's set in the mountains in the Himalayas, and it said something to me, and I loved it. And I went back to school, and I enrolled in a comparative religions course, and I had a really very fortunate to have a really good teacher who took us to some monasteries. My school was in the Catskills, and he took us. The Catskills have a number of Japanese and Tibetan monasteries and people there because it reminds them of their home in the mountains. And so I started studying with them a little bit, but I was in college. I still was into sports and girls and staying up too late and drinking too much, and so I didn't really start down the path in earnest then. But that was the beginning, and that's how I quote met Peter. And then 20 years later, I realized that I was living near him, and and it was when my marriage was falling apart and everything. Just needed something and some grounding, and I sent him a letter and said, "Hey, I understand you have a small group of students, and I'd like to join you if you're taking on new students." And he wrote me a nice letter back saying, "Yeah, come on over." And that was the beginning. So,
Wow, those moments where you can look back and see how much that affected your entire rest of your life because
yes,
he had been exposed to you at a younger age and that seed was planted. And then years later, when you need it most, to reach out and have that acceptance of having the opportunity to learn with him has had to have been just an amazing time.
it was. And I would say to your listeners, if you want something, go for it. Because that was one of those moments. Fortunately, I was a journalist, and the internet was just come. This was the late 1990s, and Google had just been invented and was coming online. And I was able to start using that to do some research, and that's how I researched and found Peter's address. And I sent him a letter. And as a journalist, I was kind of trained to, take no prisoners and to ask questions and just go out there. But I'm kind of shy at heart. So if I hadn't had that training, I don't know what would have happened. But, I would just say to your readers, if you think you want something, ask for it, go get it. What's going to happen? Worst, somebody says no, but I asked him and he said yes. And yeah, that changed my life.
So your second book, A Single Excellent Night, talks about your journey with him then, and you had some very spiritual moments on this journey. You want to touch a bit on your experiences?
Sure. So Zen meditation is something that you can do a little or you can do a lot. I liken it to if you want to be a great, if you want to play the piano, you can play the piano in a bar, or you can play the piano in for friends at home, or you can become the world's greatest concert pianist. And there's lots of different levels in between. And I'm kind of a bit of a type A personality, so I threw myself into it wholeheartedly, and I didn't intend to be the concert pianist of Zen people, but I still was going for it. You could also just want to do it once a week and just kind of get some calm and some grounding, and that's fine too. But with Peter, I would meet him 3 or 4 times a week. And then once a month, we would have a very long, full day meditation session. I also set up my own altar at home and I'd meditate every day. And it just kind of flowed from there. Zen is not for everybody, at least the way I did it and the way he did it. He wasn't strict, but he still insisted that you were very serious about it and that you put in the hours and the time. And I did. And um, that foundation then enabled me to have some of these experiences that you were talking about. It's like you're priming the pump or sowing the field or whatever metaphor you want to use. You're laying the groundwork for pretty amazing things to happen if you really put your mind to it, no pun intended. Um, and so, yes, so after I'd been studying with him for a couple of years before my car accident, I had a really amazing experience that is chronicled in the book. The book is written, it's kind of like a two-act play where it starts sort of slowly and it builds, and then it finally builds to this amazing moment halfway through the book. And then there's a quarter intermission, and then it starts again sort of slowly, and then it builds up to the final amazing experience. And there's some other smaller experiences along the way. Peter called them openings. Some people call them enlightenment experiences. In Japanese, they're called kensho, which is a kind of enlightenment opening experience. Um, and so the first one, I was at and this was before my head injury, so it's not just my bang bump on the head that caused this. Um, so I was at uh, a lecture being given by a woman named Sharon Salzberg, who has written a number of books and is very well known for teaching loving kindness meditation, or metta, as that's the Sanskrit term for it. And she was in town giving a lecture at a local school in their sort of auditorium. But it was a very beautiful school. This was in the Hamptons. I lived near the Hamptons, so when Peter lived in the Hamptons, he had moved there back in the 50s before it became the Hamptons, back when it was relatively undiscovered, but a beautiful place and close to New York City. And anyway, so there was this private school that had been built, and the benefactor had tons of money because it was the Hamptons, and she built these beautiful buildings that were very Japanese influenced with natural wood and stone. So this auditorium was not your typical high school gymnasium type auditorium. And she lectured for about 45 minutes. And at the end, she said, okay, who would like to join me in trying a little loving kindness meditation? And I had gone with a friend from Peter's group was called the Ocean Zendo. Zendo is a Japanese term for a meditation center. And it was on his property where his house was. It was an old two-stall horse barn that he had converted into the meditation space. It was a fairly small space, and he referred to it as just a country zendo because it wasn't, we didn't have a lot of people there. And anyway, so there was a woman at the zendo I didn't know very well, and she said, "You want to go to this thing?" And I said, "Sure." And so we were sitting there, and when Sharon said, "Do you want to start meditating?" Most of the people, there were about 50 or 60 people there, and most of them were in chairs, and we'd brought our own seating cushions because we were used to that and at the Ocean Zendo. And a few other people had bought their cushions as well. And we're sitting there, and Sharon turned on the lights and started giving us instruction in loving kindness meditation. And suddenly, everything just changed. The whole room just changed. It was like somebody flipped a switch, a light switch. And instead of seeing the world the way we all normally see it, which was as mass, I saw it as energy. And suddenly, all the people around me turned into these beings that they had outlines, but they were pure energy. They no longer had sort of their, color of their hair or their color of their clothes or whatever. You could sort of see through their clothes and see the energy. And interestingly enough, it wasn't just the animate objects, it wasn't just the people in the room, but the stones, the walls, the chairs, the stage, everything just started sparkling and glowing with this golden light, this golden glowing energy. And I just sat there mesmerized, and time stood still. It could have been 30 seconds. It could have been 30 years. I had no idea. And I could also really strangely, I could see all around me. I could see behind me, even though I did not turn my head. I don't have eyes in the back of my head, but I could see everything. I was just totally and completely aware of everything around me. And it was pretty freaky and wonderful and crazy at the same time. And eventually Sharon turned up the lights and started talking again and said, "Okay, we're done." And the world came back to its quote normal aspect. And I turned to the woman that I had gone with and I just said, "I need a hug." And I just hugged her and she hugged me. She's like, "What's the matter?" Because she said, "You're shaking. Your whole body is just physically shaking like crazy." And I said, "Well," I said, "I don't know what just happened, but something crazy just happened. And I need a hug." And then I excused myself and I went to the men's room and I literally grabbed the edges of the sink in the men's room, and I'm looking in the mirror because I just had to look in the mirror and make sure I was still there and make sure that that I was still a normal human being, and I wasn't losing my mind. And then I came out and we left, but it was a very spiritual. I was in presence of some sort of presence, and that energy was all part of something. You could see the spheres of people's energy sort of interacting with each other. There were no longer these solid boundaries, and we were all just part of something bigger and greater. And yes, and that was the first one. And believe it or not, there's a second experience which ends the book, which is even more intense than that, which I won't go into right now. But the next day, I called Peter in his office, and because I had to talk to him, I said, because he was my teacher, and I still had no idea what had happened. And he said, and I called him and I told him on the phone what happened, and there was this long pause. And finally, he just said, "Oh, Lee, how wonderful." And he had had, similar experiences, and many other people have. I'm not unique. I'm not alone. You can read about other people, but everybody's experience when this happens is kind of different. And he said, "Write it all down before you forget it, and then come and meet me, and we'll talk about it." And it was really wonderful. And then his right-hand person was a woman that also taught me a lot. Her name was Dorothy Friedman, and she said to me, "Oh, Lee, you saw what Einstein saw. You saw that energy is mass and mass is energy, and you saw the world in ways that Einstein tried to explain." And I realized after talking to her um, that I used to be editor-in-chief of a physics magazine when I was younger. And so I'm very well versed in physics and the whole idea of energy and mass and all that stuff. But I had always thought of it as you can convert one into the other because that's what we think of for nuclear energy and the atomic bomb. We convert, mass into energy. But what I saw that night made me realize that they can coexist simultaneously, that it's just how we see them that's different, but that they are this one and the same, but just depending on how we tune our minds. And this goes back to Zen being a training method for training your brain to see the world in certain ways. And basically at that point, I had been meditating hard enough and long enough and studying with Peter and studying with Dorothy that my mind was suddenly able to see the world in that different way and to see it as energy.
Wow, what a change in perspective that must have been. How did you wake up the next day after having such an amazing spiritual experience? I feel like I would almost crave it, expect every other circumstance or experience to measure up almost. You know what I mean? How do
That
you just,
is,
yeah.
yeah, that is one of the great dangers. And I didn't sleep much that night, I will tell you. So I don't even know if I woke up the next morning because I don't think I slept much that night. But you wake up, there's a saying in Zen, which is before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water.
Mhm.
After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. I don't claim to be enlightened. I don't claim to have achieved enlightenment, but it was a similar sort of experience where, the next day the sun comes up, the birds in my backyard were singing, and the kids had to get on the school bus, and you get on with life. And one of the things that Peter and Dorothy both drilled into me was, yes, don't make this too precious and too special. Don't when you start meditating the next day and the day after that and the day after that, don't try to recreate that experience. Don't expect it to come back because it probably won't. Just just sit with it and enjoy it. And one of Peter's favorite sayings, he has there's an ancient Japanese Zen master who lived like 800 years ago or something, whose name was Dogen Zenji, and one of his sayings was, "All the world is one bright pearl. What need is there to understand it?" And Peter liked to repeat that to me. And what that means is that basically just enjoy it. Don't try to dissect it. Don't try to do the Western thing of, oh, we have to understand this completely. Do the Eastern thing of just sit back and take a deep breath and just let it wash over you and just enjoy it and let it inform who you are and how you live and just know that it's out there.
Beautiful. How did that translate into how you looked at other people? I feel like you just, your perspective, there's God, there's the universe, there's spirit, there's all these different words that people use depending on their religious background. But, from my experience, there's just that same feeling of just that eternal oneness and I've heard it referred to as just a love that is beyond anything you can explain in Earth's world, in this human world. And, to have a glimpse of that, how did that, I can't even imagine how you can put into words, but how did that change you moving forward?
It definitely changed how I saw and continue to see the world. Once you realize how connected we are and that we're all this sort of energy sphere together, and that the other part of that experience was your ego just drops away. There was no self. Like I didn't really exist. I existed, but I just connected with everybody around me and with the greater presence of whatever that was, the great spirit, God, whatever you want to call it. And so it just it enabled me to connect with people better, enabled me to have much more compassion for people. I was still going through a really difficult time, and my wife and I did end up finally getting divorced, and it was really hard. And she has, a lot of issues, as did I, but enabled me to see her in a different way and to not demonize her. Um, I remember we were, going through couples therapy as marriage counseling, and I remember they're not supposed to take sides, and they didn't take sides, but he pulled me aside and he said, "Lee, I don't know how you're handling this, but you were just really so calm and just you're handling this really well, and much more so than I've ever seen in any other patients." And I said, "Well, that's the way I'm seeing the world right now." And so I never expected something quite like that to happen. But when I did start to seriously study with Peter, that's what I was looking for. I was looking for something to give me that groundedness, that peace, that just sort of sense of calm, and I found it.
Like part of it too is that being able to release the control of everything, giving it to God, as some would say, or just kind of releasing it to not have to control everything that's going on in your life, but letting things happen as they're supposed to. And do you, I don't know how to word this correctly, but do you feel a little bit more directed in your decisions by being able to let go?
Absolutely. Letting go is a big part of Zen. I remember at one point, because I was still even after that, I was still a impatient type A New Yorker. And I went to a retreat in Florida with this other teacher, and I was sitting in a meeting with him. And in Zen, you have these what's called dokusan in Japanese Zen. That's the word for it, where you have these very intense face-to-face meetings with your teacher, with nobody else around. It's just the two of you in a room, and you're sitting on your cushions. And at that point, you've usually been meditating for at least several hours, so you're just very aware and very present, both of you. And you have these intense conversations about life, about Zen practice, about everything. And of course, I said to him, I said, "So, what is the secret of Zen?" As if, like, he was going to give me that answer just right then and there, and I just walk away knowing everything. But that's where I was. And he sort of laughed and he said, "Letting go. I think the secret of Zen is letting go." And I think in many ways he's right. So once you let go of having to be right, of having to understand things, of having to just to possess things, there's so many things you let go of. You just let go of your ego, you let go of sense of self a little bit. It definitely frees you up to see the world in different ways. And I want to go back to one thing you just said, because you used the word God. And in the very beginning of my book, in the very, very beginning, when I sort of set up the whole book, it's like a prologue. It's even before a prologue. It's sort of notes on the book and words that I use, because there are a lot of different Japanese terms in the book. And I talk about the word God. And I say, that is such a word fraught with so many connotations, especially people that grew up being damaged by religion in some way. My ex-wife, one of her issues was that she'd been raised in a very strong, strict Catholic household. Her aunt was a nun, and she'd gone to Catholic girls' school, and she felt very damaged by that. And so, use the word God to her, and she'd just be like, "What is that?" So I use the word the Great Spirit. I use the word of presence, which is what Peter used. I use several, you can use Yahweh, you can use a number of other terms, Allah, whatever you want to say. But being a writer, I talk about my intention is to sort of reclaim the word God as a good word because it is a very powerful word that has a lot of meaning. And I had just finished reading a book by Thich Nhat Hanh, he's died a few years ago, but he was a very famous Vietnamese Zen master. And he wrote a book about love. And one of the things he said, we need to reclaim the word love because love has lost a lot of its meaning because it gets used on Madison Avenue. Like, I love my Coke, I love my Buick. It's sort of lost some of its meaning. So I think, and I was reading that and I thought, I think we need to do the same with the word God. We need to kind of reclaim it a little bit and what it means. So I appreciate you using it. So
Yeah, that's a good point. Everyone has their own spiritual journey, but I find, as I mentioned at the beginning, we all have so much noise and chaos going on. We have instant information at our fingertips all the time. So many to do things where this culture is so focused on accomplishments and the hustle, and I, no matter what people find their source of comfort and guidance from, whatever God they refer to, it feels like it's been so quieted with all that noise. And I feel like doing the Zen is one, like you said, a tool, a modality that you can use to try to turn the volume up to God and turn the volume down on all the noise. So what I find that hard to do because there's so much noise in my head. So if you have people listening who are really searching for a way to kind of, again, turn that volume down on everyday life, from your, experiences learning from Peter, like, what advice do you give to people?
slow down, calm down if you can, find those moments, take a walk on the beach or in the woods, curl up with a good book instead of, spending all your time on social media. And if you really want to go deeper and to do what I did, I would suggest finding a meditation group. I stumbled across Zen because I read Peter and he happened to live nearby me. But Peter would say to me, he said, if I hadn't found Zen, I might have found a Native American spiritual teacher. I might have found a Tibetan teacher. I might have, who knows? But there are many different paths. And the way my path is not the one for everyone. You have to find your own path. But you're right. We're so bombarded with just stuff right now. I mean, you think back to a couple hundred years ago in Japan, if you were a person living then, you wouldn't have TV, you wouldn't have cars, everything would be much slower. You would have, your transportation was walking or riding a donkey, or your getting information was talking to other people or maybe reading a scroll or something. So, now we're just bombarded with television and social media and radio and podcasts and music and it's just and the cars were going down the road 90 miles an hour instead of riding on a donkey at 3 miles an hour. Life is coming at us really fast, and so in meditation circles they refer to as monkey mind because all that stuff coming at you just makes your mind just kind of like a chattering monkey. It's just blah, 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 blah. And you have to learn to slow it down. And when you try to do that, trust me, your mind rebels. So you're not the only one that it's hard for. It's hard for me. Even to this day, it's still hard for me sometimes because I'm still on deadline for things and I've got obligations and family and things going on. And I drive my car too fast sometimes. And so finding those moments to still the monkey mind, to calm the mind. And when you start meditating, you'll have like a 5-second moment when that happens. And then a couple days later, you might have a 10-second moment. And then eventually you might have a 30-second moment. And then eventually you might have a minute. And then eventually you might have 5 minutes. And suddenly you start to see that there are other ways of experiencing the world and seeing the world. And you're quieting the mind, and that allows other things to come to the fore, whatever that is. And so it really is. And I would encourage your listeners to find a local meditation group. Sometimes they meet in, yoga studios. Sometimes they meet in libraries. The group that I currently sit with meets in a Presbyterian church. A lot of Unitarian churches allow meditation groups and Zen groups to use their facilities. And it's a good way to sort of experience it and try it and start, but don't expect everything to happen all at once. Don't be a type A New Yorker like me. Take your time, give it a chance, go back and find a good teacher that you just feel connected with, that you feel comfortable with, and also a group that you feel comfortable with. Because in Japanese Zen, it's called a sangha. It's also in sangha. I think it might even be a Sanskrit term. But anyway, because you will be buoyed up by the people around you, and you won't feel like you're doing something strange and crazy, and you'll be these other people, and they'll be farther along than you are, and they'll help you, and you just feel this community, and you feel this support that can really help you. And there's also the things that you can't see in the beginning, which is that energy that you're all sitting there and connected with this similar energy, and you feel it eventually. And Peter used to say that he could tell when a group was really together because they always start breathing in unison as well. Like you could just, if you're really quiet and everything is really quiet, you can start to hear the people around you breathe, and everybody starts breathing the same, and they all sort of become one, and it's really beautiful. So I would, you can also learn a lot from podcasts and from YouTube videos and from books and that sort of thing. But I think to really get the full flavor of it, you eventually need to find a group and find a teacher. If you go to my website is leecarlson.life, not leecarlson.com, but leecarlson.life, because that's what this is all about. And a pop-up will come up asking for your email address if you want to join the mailing list. And when you sign up, one of the things you get is a 25-page PDF that you can download on how to find a great teacher and what red flags to look for and not a great teacher, and how to find, a group that's good for you. And I think it's something that a lot of people could use. So that's why I give it away for free. So.
Yeah, I'll put the link in the show notes, but I'm glad that you touched on that because my next question was really to talk about how you dedicate this book to Peter, who, had the prologue is, dedicated to him after his passing, and how instrumental having such a great teacher for so long has been to impact your life, that not only did it change your life, but now you have the desire to teach others. Let's talk a little bit about that importance of that relationship again between with a good teacher and having that impact of someone who affects your life so deeply.
So I know you're a life coach, and a good teacher and a life coach probably, you can use any term you want, different, it can be interchangeable, but he he helped me not only with meditation and with learning how to sit and breathe properly, but he helped me with a lot of life stuff. It was very funny because most things in Zen are a paradox. And one of the paradoxes was that he would say to me when we had our face-to-face meetings, he would say, now remember, this is a chance to talk about Zen and talk about meditation and talk about your practice and where you are. And he said, this is not where we sit and talk about things outside of your practice and your life. And then immediately he would start talking to me about my life. So because they're connected, you can't really separate them. And so he gave me a lot of good Zen Eastern wisdom centered advice on my marriage and my divorce and my recovery from traumatic brain injury and work. And we were both writers, so there was a certain synergy there that went deeper than most people because, for example, my first book, he was one of the first readers, and he gave me a lot of good feedback on how to make it better. And he taught me a lot about writing as well. So just having a good mentor and teacher in your life, I think, is a wonderful thing. A life coach, a mentor, a teacher, whatever you want to, call it. We don't leave teachers behind when we graduate from school. We need them throughout our entire lives. And a large part of this book is dedicated to that idea that, we can have good teachers at any time in our life. And before Peter died, he knew he was sick, and he and I talked a bit about teaching. And I said to him, do I know enough to teach? And he said, oh, absolutely. And you should teach. And then he started teaching me how to do certain things, how to, run a group, and how just, how to all the interpersonal dynamics in a meditation group, and how to teach people individually and as a group, and just what to do. And then he died. It's now 10 years ago. And then my aunt, who's also in the book, Joanna Macy, she just passed away this spring, unfortunately, at age 96. She had a really wonderful life, and she was also a teacher. And I realized that that generation is now gone or almost gone, and that it's my turn to step up, and that Peter had wanted me to and given me the tools to do that. So with this book is really a teaching. I believe people learn through stories, and so this book is a long adventure story. Basically, it's an adventure story of going on the last great adventure, which is exploring the mind, and it's an adventure of what it's like to study with such an amazing teacher. He led an amazing life himself, much more so than me, and so it just yes, that's why I'm doing this podcast with you, and that's why I wrote the book, and we'll see where it goes from there. So
Well, sometimes it's not always easy to share, but when you understand that it's your purpose, as I would say, or that you feel very drawn to sharing, you have to believe that it's all happening for the right reason because you're doing it for the right reason, and you have to trust in that. When you were losing someone that was so close to you, how much did your Zen practice and your experiences play into that grief process?
it helped. It was very hard. Yes, when you lose somebody that's so close to you, he was not my parent, but he was my spiritual father. He was very much a father figure to me. So he definitely had a huge impact in my life, and it was difficult because I did feel a little adrift when he passed away, and sort of like, oh, he's not there anymore, and I can't rely on him. But he had given me enough grounding and taught me enough that I realized I could rely on myself and just carry on. So it's taken 10 years, but and it's funny because when I started writing this book, my original intention was to cover the full 15 years of my relationship with him. And as I kept writing, it was turning to War and Peace. It was just turning this giant thing. And I was like, yeah, this is too much, especially because Zen is about paring back. I said, well, it's not a very Zen book if it's going to be 700 pages, right? So, um, so I realized that there was this natural dramatic arc with these couple of different events that happened that ended up being a really great place for the book to end. And it was only after my first 4 years with him. And I had already written a lot of the rest of the book, and one of the sections that will come in the sequel, because there will be a sequel because I've already written half of it, um, is I talk about grief. And I talk about the Eastern view of grief and the Zen view of grief and how you deal with it. And I look at it from the perspective of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and how she looked at it and how different that is from the Eastern, the Zen view. And because not only did I lose Peter, but throughout this process, in the first 4 years of the book, I lost my mother to a traumatic brain injury. She had her own serious accident and eventually died. She much more seriously injured than I was, so she eventually died. She never recovered. And I was her caregiver for the last year of her life. I lost my marriage and I lost my kids. Talk about grief. All I ever wanted to do was be a really good father. And because of my accident, um, my wife took the kids and moved away. And normally you're not allowed to do that, but she was allowed to do that because the judge said, well, you're not working, you don't have any income, you can't support your family, you're injured, so she has to do her thing. I was like, okay. So, so there was a lot of grief there, a lot going on. And so I had to deal with not only, losing Peter eventually, but some other things along the way that he helped me deal with. So, yeah.
Like there's a comfort in knowing that you're having an experience that is so enlightening. When you're dealing with grief, or we talked a little bit before the podcast about my dad, because you, as you mentioned, are a yoga instructor as well, and how important that yoga and that breathing helped my dad with COPD. And for me, that spiritual experience of his passing, again, having that moment where you understand that there's something so much bigger than us, and seeing that energy and feeling that energy for me was such a comfort. So I have to assume that when you've had those enlightening experiences, that it kind of feels the same way. Like you understand it's just so much bigger than us.
I will tell you, especially from the second experience in the book, that's the end of the book, that you realize that there's something more, and that that when somebody passes on, that is what they're doing. They're passing on to someplace else. And so once you know that, it makes it much easier to send them on their way and say goodbye to them and wish them well. And of course, I always joke that probably had one of those, like, going through the tunnel and seeing the light experiences when I had my brain injury, my accident. But because I had amnesia from the accident, I don't remember it. So, lucky me, right? I probably had one, but don't even know it. But so I think that's part of it. There's also the part which is the non-self part, which is very important because when you start to not do away with your ego, but when you start to sort of diminish your ego a little bit and become more one with others and not so worried about yourself, and yourself becomes a much smaller part of who you are, then no longer you're saying, why is this happening to me? Or you're not feeling like, oh, I'm sad or I'm angry or I'm, whatever. It's not about you anymore. It is about other people and the other person. And when it's not so much about you, it makes it much easier to deal with some of the grief and the things like that. But at the same time, there's a very famous story of a Zen master who his daughter died young, and this was years ago, hundreds of years ago. So, people you had a lot more youth and infant mortality in those days. And he was sobbing because his daughter had died. And one of his students came up to him and started yelling at him and said, "You're a fraud. Like, all this time I was listening to you and but look at you, you're not really detached. You're no different than the rest of us. You're attached to your daughter and she died and you're sobbing and you shouldn't be doing that. And I'm going to leave and go study with someone else." And the master just looked at him and said, "I cry because I can."
Mm.
And that, I think, says it all about grief and about we're humans. We're still all humans, no matter what. And so we have those feelings, and it's okay to have those feelings. It's okay to grieve, and it's okay to be sad when you lose someone. But at the same time, when you realize they're going on to somewhere else, I'll tell you a really crazy story that's in the book is that my Aunt Joanna, because she was from a Tibetan tradition, in Tibet, they have this, in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, they have these things called the bardos, and the bardos are intermediate states and of being. And one of the ones is when you die, there's this intermediate state where your soul or whatever leaves your body and goes somewhere else. And then there's another bardo where it sort of stays in that bardo for, I think it's 49 days before it, then it's an intermediate state before it moves on to whatever happens next, heaven, whatever you want to call it. And when my mom was dying, and we knew she was dying, it was definitely her last, very last days because her organs were shutting down. And I called Joanna and I said, "Joanna, what do I do? Like, how do I help her?" And I didn't call and say, "Joanna, what do I do for me?" I called her and said, "What do I do for my mom?" Right. And Joanna said, "Don't forget about the bardos." And that was all she needed to say. And I realized that, I need to help my mother through this. And she said, read her poetry, just sit by her bed, just talk to any poets she had, play her music, help her make this transition. She has to transition from one state to the next, which I did. And then we had, it took us a while to get together for her memorial service because she had died in Florida and all of her friends were in Buffalo, New York. And so we wanted to have the service where her friends were. And it took, a few weeks to get that together. And once we had chosen the date for her service at the church where she had belonged for years, I looked at the calendar and I realized it was the 49th day. And that we had chosen the day for her service, which was the day that she would, in Tibetan
Mm.
mythology or tradition, or whatever, would be the day that she would transition from this intermediate state to whatever happens next. And, I don't believe in coincidences. I think that was something that was meant to be and very spiritual. And at the church, there were like 1,000 people there. She was very vibrant in her community and very loved and did a lot of volunteer work. And she died young, so there were still a lot of her friends were alive and around. And and I gave the eulogy, and as part of the eulogy, I talked about the Bardo, and I talked about Aunt Joanna, and I talked about that this was the day, and I said, let's everybody take a moment of silence to wish her well on her journey. Sorry, get a little emotional. Anyway, and so we did, and they did. And this is fairly conservative Midwestern, community, and her. So I was like, oh boy, I hope these people don't think I've gone too far. But afterwards, so many people came up to me and thanked me specifically for that part of the eulogy and that part of the service, and thanked me for giving them the opportunity to say goodbye and to wish her on her way. And so it was really moving. And that's another way of dealing with grief is having those moments, those rituals where we all get together as a community and say goodbye to somebody and wish them well.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I'll share with you real quick a little bit about my story with my dad. I'll give you the super condensed version. Um, he was not well in the hospital, but on the way to the hospital, he had stopped breathing in the ambulance. And he had told me when he came back, it brought him back to the hospital, that he didn't see anything. It was all darkness. He said, "Sorry, Erica, there's no bright lights, there's no angels. It was just nothing." So he was very afraid. So I told him, "Well, when it's time, you have to send me a sign." So I said, "Give me some time, I'll think about it." So I went home and I prayed about it, thought about it. And I said, next day, I'm like, "Dad, it's a hummingbird. You have to send me the hummingbird." And he rolled his eyes and he smirked because he did that with me all the time. He was used to my crazy ideas. But fast forward 10 days in the hospital, we had this, good conversation at the end, told me where the life insurance policy was. He held my hand and yeah, awake enough to get me back to the hospital that night. And lo and behold, as he's passing, this new chaplain is by my side holding my hand. And I reminded him to send me the hummingbird because I knew he was between worlds, is what the chaplain had said. And the chaplain looked at me and she had a beautiful giant hummingbird on her necklace. She was
Oh,
never
wow.
supposed to work that day. She wasn't, I mean, all the coincidences were just so powerful that I walked away from that moment with the complete confidence and belief and comfort that is so much bigger than us. And those, if you can get those signs or those moments where you can understand the timing and the journey, how beautiful it is, it's just a beautiful gift that we are able to receive if we're open to it.
And a lot of Zen is about that. We didn't talk about it, but a lot of it is learning awareness, is becoming more and more aware of the world around you. And so there are some people that might have missed that sign. They might not have seen the hummingbird. They might not have said something to the pastor or whatever. But when we become more aware of these things and we see the signs and we just kind of go, oh yeah, okay,
Yep.
yep.
Yep. It's
So
pretty
it's
cool.
really wonderful. Yeah, that's great. I love that. I will remember the hummingbird for sure because I love
Yeah.
hummingbirds.
They're
So
special, they're spiritual for sure. So thank you
yeah.
for letting me share that with you. So as you're embarking on this teaching journey to try to spread your knowledge and your experience of all that you've learned, do you have like one piece of advice that you would share for people as a teacher of this to help improve or guide them in their life?
Sure. So I'm going to go back and just correct you about one thing you said. I'm not a yoga teacher, at least not yet. I'm a yoga practitioner. So I enjoy all different kinds of yoga, but that does lead into what we're about to talk about. So when I was studying with Peter towards the end, and he was teaching me about how to teach, and at one point he just looked at me and very calmly, he just said, Lee, he said, even in spite of everything I've taught you, just remember one thing. He said, just teach them how to breathe. That's all you can really do. That's it. Sounds so simple, but it's hard to do. And he would constantly be, he said, he would tell the congregation, the Sangha, he would always say, my one great teaching is moment by moment, breath by breath. That is my greatest teaching. And that idea of the breath, of just staying with your breath, of concentrating on the breath, I think is really, really important. And one thing I didn't learn from the Ocean Zendo and from Peter was yoga. They didn't do any sort of physical practice there. It was really just sitting and meditating. And there's some walking meditation. So there's some physicality, but it's not like yoga physicality. And I have been an athlete my whole life. And so I gravitated to yoga as a practice, and especially Ashtanga yoga, which is a more physical kind of yoga, even though I do other kinds as well. And in the yogic tradition, there are many breathing practices that you can learn. And so Peter telling me to just teach people how to breathe sort of started me down this path. I now have a whole bookshelf full of books on breathing and the breath. I have Chinese treatises, I have Japanese treatises, I have Tibetan treatises, I have Western medicine treatises. And I realized that the breath is just such an amazing thing that it's a lifelong study. And I'm driving my car. I try to concentrate on my breath, especially if I start to feel like I'm getting monkey mind again. I'm waiting in the supermarket checkout line. I'm wherever I am, whatever I'm doing. I just try to concentrate on breathing and my breath. And I think so. If there's one thing I could leave your listeners with, it's listen to your breath, concentrate on your breath, learn from somebody, find somebody that can teach you about the breath. If you go to a yoga studio, find one that teaches breath practice. And if you find a meditation teacher, find somebody that focuses on the breath. And it is our connection. It's the one thing that connects us with the outside and the inside. It goes inside of us, it goes outside of us. And there are many people that believe that every time you breathe, you're breathing in molecules that were breathed in by Einstein or Aristotle, or, that it connects us through the ages as well. So
That's a great piece of advice. I mentioned frequently on this podcast how many times that these different episodes intersect each other. And I tell you that we had one coach on, I'll share real quick, one coach on that said that he was training an athlete. He was over in the East. Maybe was it Thailand or somewhere. And they had an injury and they went and saw three doctors. There was a chiropractor, an orthopedic, and something else. I don't remember, but three different types of doctors. And all three doctors asked them this athlete who was injured, the same question. And it was, do you do breath work? And I was like, you don't have that question here in America. No one even talks
right.
about it, but it's so crucial to calm your nervous system and to connect to your God and to just slow down. So I think that made me emotional when you said that, because I'm repeatedly told to breathe. So thank you for telling me, because I know I need to hear it.
And we all need to hear it all the time. I mean, that's part of learning. I need to hear it. I'm supposedly an advanced practitioner, but sometimes I forget and I need to be reminded. So
Yeah.
it's just the way we are.
Before I wrap up with my final question, will you tell us how everybody can find you? And you mentioned your website earlier, which I will put in the show notes, but talk about where to get your book. And then your second book sequel? Do you have a timeline on that?
Well, this one just was released on October 28th, so the new one's going to be a while. I'm need to focus on getting this one, but I think maybe a year, maybe 2 years. It's not going to be in the next few months, I'm sure of that. The best way to find me is through my website, because from there you can connect to lots of other different things. So the website again is leecarlson.life. You don't even need the www, it's just leecarlson.life. And on there is my email address. I welcome people to reach out to me and connect with me. I'm always happy to, answer questions and to talk to people. I might not answer you right away because I might be on retreat or I might be, doing some other things, but I do get back to people eventually. And also I'm on Facebook and Instagram and X and LinkedIn, and the links to all those are on my website. Also, the book is available through all the major outlets. It's available in hardcover, paperback, and ebook, with a audiobook coming soon. And there's a link right on my website that you can click on that will take you to a place where you can order the book from. It's called a universal book link. So if you click on that, you can order from Barnes and Noble, you can order from Amazon, you can order from Kobo, you can order the ebook, whatever you want. You can order from Apple, books for the ebook. You can do that. You can go to Amazon directly. Of course, they're the 800-pound gorilla, and you
Right.
can order directly from them. And you can order, the ebook and both hardcover or softcover from them. And if you do, please leave a review, because let people know that you liked the book and that it said something to you and helped you in some way, and let other people know. And there's more information on there about me and my background and history, and there's a calendar with upcoming events, and there's a blog that's not up right now, but will be starting up again soon. And so there's lots of and like I said, if you sign up, you'll get the guide to finding a good teacher, and then the other guide you'll get is a 5-page guide that's a study guide that can be used in book clubs, in, if you have a meditation group that wants to read the book. That was one of the things with Peter. Every Monday night we would meet and we'd have anywhere from like 5 people to 10 people and Peter, and we were reading a book that would take us a couple of months, and we'd talk about the book, and Peter would give us his viewpoint and wisdom on the book we were reading. So I find that that's, good even, and it's not a quote a book club. It's really just, part of our Sangha, part of our group. So you can get that. They can be used in classrooms, etc.
Great. And
And
we'll
those,
put all the, I'm sorry, we'll put all the
oh
links in
no,
the show
yep,
notes as well to make sure
yep.
people can find it, the book as well. So I'm going to wrap up with my final question. So if you, Lee, today can have a conversation with Lee of the past, maybe the one who had just suffered that traumatic brain injury, maybe the one who was going through the divorce and all the hardship, you can pick which version of you want to talk to. But what would you tell him?
I'd tell them to be patient and just keep putting one foot in front of the other. Don't expect too much too fast, but also don't walk away from your path because you think it's not happening fast enough. You just need to keep your nose to the grindstone. It's like any other thing you want to do. If you want to, anything else you want to end up being good at or helping you in your life, you just got to keep at it, and don't be afraid of it. Don't but don't let it go either. I in the first part of in my 20s and 30s, when I had wanted to do more, I had taken my interests and sort of put them in a proverbial box and tied them up in a bow and stuck them up on a proverbial back shelf of a closet because it had caused some. It wasn't what it eventually caused my marriage to fall apart, but it had caused some friction at some point because, as I said, my wife was really opposed to anything that smacked of any kind of spirituality or religion because of her background. And so I put it away for a while because I just didn't want to cause trouble. But, eventually it came out, and it always does. If it'll find its way if it's meant to be. So,
Yeah. So now if you, Lee, can have a conversation with your future self, what would you ask him and what do you think he would say back to you?
mm, I think I would ask him if I had done okay and if had followed the right path and if I should have done it sooner or whatever. And I think he would just say, no, things happen in their own way, in their own time, and you just followed your path, and that's fine. Just be okay with that.
I think you should be okay with it because you're impacting others by what you're doing. And I'm so grateful that you have shared your story and that you're teaching and that you're letting us all learn from all that you've experienced. So thank you again for the conversation today. I appreciate
Well,
you.
thank you, Erica. You've been a really great interviewer too. So it makes it easy when you ask good questions and you have a good interviewer. So thank you.
Thank you.